So today we're going to replace this broken screen on an iPod 4th generation, and if there's quite a few videos out there and a lot of them tell you have to use a heat gun. Now it's a little bit of overkill for an iPod. You don't have to use a heat gun on one of these, but if you're replacing the screen on an iPad you do, but on an iPod it really is overkill and doesn't need a heat gun whatsoever. What we actually do need to do is, I like to start off by using a small craft knife like this to actually start to release the screen down here at the bottom. Now the reason I start at the bottom is because there's not a lot down here. There's only the home button. There's no ribbons or anything that we can actually break, but at the top here you've got the Wi-Fi antenna, you've got the camera, you've got the actual ribbon cables that attach the screen to the motherboard underneath, although we are going to be replacing those. So there is some things in here that you can actually damage. So what I like to do is get started here with using the craft knife, and then use some, that's a plastic pick there, and some other tools here that we can actually use to get all this separated and moving. And I get it to a position and I start to lift it upwards in that direction, and just use the force of lifting it up to separate the screen at the top part here, so I'm not sticking any tools in here and potentially damaging anything. So starting off at this bottom corner here, now be really careful because there is a bezel that runs round the sides of the LCD screen, and it's actually in between the screen and the aluminium chassis under there. And be really careful when you're starting off, especially with a craft knife, that you don't damage this bezel, because otherwise you'll end up having to replace that as well. So I'll just get in between and start to work it loose like that. Once I've got a corner up, use my little pick here so it doesn't go back down and make contact with the adhesive and stick itself back down again. Depending on how hard this job is, really depends on how damaged your screen is. If it's really damaged, it's not going to come out all in one piece. You also have to be careful that you don't end up cutting yourself as well. So the earlier you do this, the better. Just pushing it up very, very slowly, because in between there, hopefully you can see, there's all your ribbon cables and your Wi-Fi antenna, and you do not want to damage them. I'm just pushing this glue out of the way. So once you get the two halves separated like this, it's best to just snip that ribbon cable there to the old LCD, just so you can get that out of the way. Well, we do need to get some parts off this, the home button and that bracket there at the top, but we'll do that later. Now is a good time to, you want to clean all this double-sided sticky tape away, and if your LCD is really smashed, you'll probably have little bits of glass in there as well. You've got to just take your time and make sure you get all that out of there. So that definitely took about 15 minutes of my time to get it totally clean. Couple of little things that I use is the magical invention called Blue Tack. Excellent for getting in those little edges and cleaning it up, especially if you've got little bits of broken glass in there as well. And you've got a bit of rubbing alcohol and a cotton bud, and that's the dirt that came off round the sides when I thought it was actually clean. That came off the plastic, so a little bit of rubbing alcohol just to prepare all that edge nice and clean, ready for some new double-sided tape to hold the new LCD down. Okay, so now we're going to have to remove some screws, and there are 3 screws here along the bottom, 3 screws up on this side, plus one there, plus the one on the Wi-Fi antenna just there, and there's also a screw here that we have to remove. Now you may well, if you buy one of these off Amazon, a lot of them come with a little kit with a little screwdriver that you can use for this. Now you may, if it's your first time having a go at something like this, want to draw out a rough outline of an iPod on a piece of paper, and then position your screws for you taking them out. And then this is the Wi-Fi antenna here. So once you've got your screws out, we have to remove this can now to actually get to the circuit board underneath. And there's a couple of things here that you have to be careful of. Just here there's a speaker, and that's actually soldered down into there, but because of the double-sided sticky tape, if we just go in and rip this can up, we can actually rip the speaker out with it, and then obviously your speaker's no good. Also there's a little power flex cable here, and we have to be really careful with that it stays in place, because otherwise it can stay connected to this can and that can be ripped out as well. So take your pick and work it under this corner here, get it in between the speaker like so. So we're not going to rip that off. Now what I do now is I give it a twist and it just releases, and with your left hand just try and just keep it apart like that, because if you let it drop it will end up sticking back down again. Now this, what I want to do is get my pick and position it in between the circuit board and that flex cable there. Very gently, just feeling your way, not going too far in. And what I'm going to do here, I'm going to hold this down, so I'm holding this ribbon cable down so I'm not ripping it out, and gently pull up on the can. Again, there you go. And if you have broken your LCD and your battery is it's not holding a charge like it used to, it's actually a good idea to replace the battery at the same time, because these batteries aren't that expensive. And of course, to replace the battery you can probably end up damaging your LCD tape. Now that this can is actually loose, it's still connected with a little piece of copper tape here. Now I want to be really careful, don't rip that copper tape, but there's a clip here above the rear facing camera, and I'm going to get underneath that and just pop that out, and then you should be able to lift this can right off now with that piece of copper tape in place. So now we want to get underneath the camera, and we want to pop that out of the way. Being really careful here, there's a flex cable there again, don't want to damage that. Just gently tease the camera out. There we go. And there's two more screws here that we need to remove, one holding the front facing camera on in place there, and one that's holding the motherboard down here. Now I am going to be replacing the front facing camera on this particular one, so keep these screws separate from the other screws. So now we're going to have to pop out the motherboard, and we're not going to completely take it out, but again, we're really careful. Flex cable here, and what we're going to do, we're going to come in with our pick, put it over the top of that flex cable, pressing down on it to protect that, and also pushing up to pop the motherboard out in this area here. So again, really careful. Just lift it up. So we've got our motherboard like that there. So being really careful, what I'm going to do is remove this front facing camera, because I'm going to be replacing that one. It's just held in with a little bit of double-sided tape again. And this is the flex cable that we cut from our LCD, and it's held in place by this copper tape. Now I want to carefully peel this copper tape out of the way, because we do want to use that again. I'll pick just to there we go. We've released that cable. So to replace the camera, I'm using my finger in there, so I'm not putting any more strain. It's probably at its maximum on that motherboard, and I've got to kind of feel my way to get this little clip in place. Really is a fiddly job. There we go, felt it click. So taking the home button off the old LCD, and we're going to put that in place. And we're also, on the old LCD, we're going to have to remove this bracket to attach to the new LCD. So I actually find it a little bit easier to use a knife for this. Make sure you're working away from yourself. Try and get that bracket off without bending it. And what we're going to do, we're going to line this bracket up here, that little white dot there, that hole there. There we go. The LCD in place. So we'll take off this protective cover. So I'm going to try and get this on camera the best I can. Again, this is very fiddly. Normally you can actually hear it click a lot louder than that, but seems to be in. So now I'm going to move this front facing camera back into position. just going to put this copper shielding tape back around. Now we're ready to put the motherboard back into place, and that's seated back down properly. It's going to feel like it doesn't want to go back, but just a tiny bit of pressure and there you go, clicks back. Okay, so now it's just a matter of putting everything back together. I'll put this little camera screw in place, front facing camera screw in place first. And then this top motherboard screw. So, and we've got this little clip here, but we want that little copper shielding to go underneath that. So put this can back in place, keep that in place. Put those little clips under. So now it's just a matter of putting all the screws back. So now we just got little double-sided sticky tape kit off Amazon, so we can stick the LCD down. Trouble with these aftermarket kits though, none of them ever fit correctly. You always have to end up cutting them or modifying them. Okay, so just double check that. There we go, it's all working. So what you want to do, you want to get your top bit lined up first. You got that clip, get that down and in place. I just did that little click. Nice and flush all the way around. One last thing that I wanted to mention is if your screen's broken because it's been dropped on one of these corners and the corner's been dinged in, you will have to get that dent out before you fit a screen, otherwise you can end up cracking your screen again. If it's not too bad, you can get a piece of wooden doweling and a leather belt and hold the leather belt up against the corner like so, and the doweling, and push out. If it's really bad, then he'll have to get a Dremel and ground the sides in a little bit, just so the screen will fit back in properly again. But this iPod had been smashed face first, so all the corners were good. So I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, please give it a big thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe, and I'll catch you next time.
Initiating shutdown sequence.